Thank you, and good morning, and I appreciate you all letting me come in to talk about this. I'm going to cover three pieces, really. The first part is just a really quick review of where we've been with accountability, and then at the end, I will talk about where we are for 2017, and in the middle is going to be the whole what if and what's to come in 2017-2018. We have been in a 4-index system for a while now, and this should not be new information, but I'll review it just to be on the safe side. Right now, our 4 indices are Index 1, looking at student achievement, which has been overall percent passing. Index 2 is student progress, which has been about moving students forward wherever they're starting. Index 3 is closing performance gaps and is focused on your historically lowest performing student groups. And Index 4 has been post-secondary ready, which is just preparation for the next level. For a MET standard in the past couple of years, we have had to meet the specific standard on either Index 1 or Index 2, but we absolutely had to meet the standard on Index 3 and Index 4, right? So that's all review. And that has been in place since Accountability 2013. Okay, this has been our world. Along with that, we also have a community and student engagement accountability system, which maybe you don't think of as an accountability system, but it really is. And it's looking at 9 specific areas as well as an overall rating. The labels for this system are unacceptable, acceptable, recognized, and exemplary. And just going back real quick, in our 2017 index system, we only have 2 labels, and they are MET standard or improvement required. So even in these 2 systems, there are 2 different rating labels. What's unique about the community and student engagement system is that this applies to everybody in the state, but each district designs their own system. So what we look at for fine arts is going to be different from what every other district looks at across the state. All right, so this one is locally developed, and we set the standards, we define the criteria, and then we rate ourselves. Okay? In the 4-index system, what is the majority of that data based on? State assessment, student performance, right? So these 2 are pretty much divorced from each other to date, right? And this has been in place since 2014. So 2017 will be the 4th year of us having that. Is that right? 14, 15, 16, 17. 4th year of us rating ourselves, okay? So now let's look at where we are in terms of the new world we're about to enter. In June 2015, HB 2804 was passed, and what it really did was it redefined accountability in Texas, not only in the system, but also in the type of rating labels that we're going to get. Moving forward, we are going to be in a system that requires letter grades A through F, all right? And that is going to be put in place beginning with the 2017-2018 school year. Now, what's happened along the way getting to where we are is various groups have met, including the Accountability Technical Advisory Committee, the Policy Advisory Committee, and the Texas Commission on Next Generation of Assessment and Accountability. Since June, these committees have been meeting and advising TEA on what we think should be included in this application of HB 2804. On December 1st, TEA adopted officially the indicators that will feed into the new system. And so now we are here on the cusp of a what-if report that was mandated in HB 2804. This report is going to be based on the data that we were held accountable for in 2015, 2016. So none of the data is new. It's just being reconfigured in this new world, okay? On January 1st, we will have more information on what that looks like. So let's talk specifically about the domains, okay? The 5 domains in this new system are Domain 1, Student Achievement, Domain 2, Student Progress, Domain 3, Closing Performance Gaps. Do those sound familiar? Yeah, very similar to what we had in our 4-index system. And Domain 4 is post-secondary ready. The new topic, domain 5, is community and student engagement. So in this new world, we see the two systems now being married or remarried, however you want to look at it, right? They're coming together. One big difference is that those first 3 domains are mostly, that's not true, they are completely based on STAR data. The results from these domains will be based on student performance as shown on the STAR assessments, both 3 through 8 and EOCs. The other side, domain 4 and domain 5, cannot have any STAR assessment data included in them. In our old world or current world of index system, domain 4 does include some STAR data, but in this new world, it cannot. Okay? So we will get letter grades in each of the 5 domains as well as an overall grade level. The first 3 domains, as prescripted by HB 2804, will contribute to 55% of that overall grade. Domain 4, post-secondary ready, will contribute 35% of that overall grade. And even more specifically, they have said that for a district or a high school, that 10% of that has to come from the graduation rate, and the remaining 25% has to come from other post-secondary ready indicators. So I'll get into the more specifics of that, but you can see here they've been a lot more prescriptive in this bill about accountability than they have in the past. And the last 10% will come from our community and student engagement accountability system. Is TELPAS included in here? And it is only as it affects the student's placement on an ELL progress measure or on a plan, an ELL plan. So now we get to the what if that's coming. TEA has been tasked with modeling those first 4 domains in a report that they have to give to us before it becomes real. So let's talk about domain 1, student achievement. It is made up of all tests, all subjects, all grades, and the indicators we have here are performance at satisfactory. That sounds a lot like index 1, right? But in addition to performance at satisfactory, it will also include performance at the college ready level and performance at the advanced level. So this domain will be looking at all 3 levels. Now I do want to point out that HB 2804 does not mandate that the advanced level be included here, but the commissioner has that discretion, and he is preferring to have it here so that all 3 levels are considered in that first domain. So in terms of grades for this domain, right now they're going to be defined by campus type. Campus type is talking about elementary, middle school, high school. Okay, similar to what we have seen in domains 2 and 3 in our current system. So right now, the proposal is to have 10% of the grades be an A, 20% B, 35% C, 20% D, and 15% F. D and F are considered equivalent to our current improvement required. So in this proposal, it looks like 35% of our campuses and districts will be identified as improvement required. Now, just to give you some perspective, in our old system and in our current system, we have never had more than 10%, at least in the 4-domain system, we have never had more than 10% of our campuses or districts identified as IR. So this is a radical increase. But I want you to take note of that asterisk, and that is that the grade norming that is identified here, which really puts us on this sort of a normal curve with a little bit of a higher tail end, this curve is for the what if report only. They have to start somewhere. And so what they're doing is they're establishing these cuts, but when it becomes reality, the targets that they're setting will be something that a campus or district can attain. They're going to look at real data after this what if report. All right? Okay, so in this example, what we have at the top are the data points of all 3 of those standards of performance. We have satisfactory, recommended, and advanced. And in the current proposal, all three of them are weighted equally. So you are basically taking all three of those percentages, adding them up and dividing by 300. So for me as a student, to get full credit for my reading performance, I would have to perform at the advanced level. That would get me a point in all three of those percentages. Does that make sense? Now, much like Index 1, this one takes all the scored tests and puts them in there. So if I was a fifth grader, how many tests am I putting in to Domain 1? 3. I would be putting in reading, math, and science, right? As an eighth grader, I would be putting in 4 because I would take reading, math, science, and social studies. Okay, but it's all put in there together, one number in the end. I do want to say that both the Technical Advisory Committee and the Policy Advisory Committee are recommending that this equal weighting for all three levels not be reality when it is put into place. The Commissioner has really indicated that he is pushing towards the idea of 60 by 30. And what that really means is that in Texas, what he's looking to, and the higher education has spoken to this as well, they really want to have 60% of Texans between the ages of about 20 and 50 that are college ready or college going by the year 2030. So 60% of our 20 to 50-year-olds to be college going by the year 2030 or have degrees. Does that make sense? So that's what he has stated is what he wants from this. So what we have proposed as ATAC is to have 90% of this overall score come from the performance at satisfactory, because we believe 90% of our kids should be performing at that sort of proficient level. 60% of the college ready should count here, and then 30 of the advanced. So that would give different weights for each of the different levels. There is one other proposal from APEC that would exclude performance at advanced from this domain, okay, for the reason stated right there. It's not part of HB 2804. So there's still some what if in this part of the world, okay? But for right now, when we get this what if report, it is going to have equal weighting for all three standards. So the question is, if he's interpreting this correctly in that this is going to be a forced curve, a forced bell curve, and the answer is yes. They are going to force it in this first what if release so that we have 20% of our campuses rated a D and 15% rated an F, and that top A is only going to be 10%. This is going to be by campus type. So grades scores may be similar, but because they want to normalize it sort of with a little bit of a weight on the tail end, they will force grades to fit this model. This is specifically for the what if report and will not be what is in place when the 17-18 system comes into play. They will not have a straight curve. That's what I'm saying, will not be in place. Because in addition to the cut score or this starting point, they're trying to build into the system a way to bump up a letter grade, to control for things like proportion of economically disadvantaged, or to control for your 40 comparable type campuses that look at things like your economically disadvantaged, your campus type, your percent ELL, your percent special ed, and your mobility. So all of these things they want to include in the system to sort of temper the distribution of grades. So in the end, my understanding of the system is that it will not be a straight curve. The goal will be that every campus can attain the levels that they're shooting for. What they'll do is they'll take the entire state of elementaries, every elementary in the state, and they will calculate their Domain 1 score. And with the entire state, they will then set the curve. So they're not going to take Richardson and say, in Richardson, 35% of our campuses have to be D's and F's, or 10% of our campuses have to be A's. They're going to apply this to the state as a whole. All right, so let's go to Domain 2. Domain 2, remember, is student progress. What they're looking at here are 10 student groups, all students, the 7 race ethnic groups, special ed, and then our English language learners, and that will include our current ELLs as well as our monitored students. So we get credit for kids who exit in their first and second year of being exited. It'll look at only reading and math, and it'll include the STAR progress measure as well as the ELL progress measure. So this is looking very similar to what we have right now in Index 2. So what are the indicators? Met progress is going to be 1 point. Exceeded progress is going to be 2 points. Now, this looks a lot like what we have right now, and it is. What they're doing is collapsing all of these groups into one number, just like we're doing right now in Index 2. And they'll take that same distribution for grades in Domain 2. Okay, so all of that is still in play. And again, here, these percentiles are strictly for the what if report. Okay, again, no, they are pretty much guaranteeing that it won't be this distribution when it comes in 2017, 2018. So let me say one other thing about Domain 2. Right now, for the what if report, they are using, like I said before, the 2015, 2016 data. And in that data set, all we have are the STAR progress measure and the ELL progress measure. There have been some concerns about those measures in that the Technical Advisory Committee was really hoping to see something along the lines of a transition table. What a transition table would do is it would extend the number of growth sort of bands. So you could have students that start off very low and then grow nothing, grow a little bit, grow as expected, grow a little more than expected, and then really exceed what's expected. So it really breaks it up into performance bands so that students, you can see the difference between a kid who is doing just a little versus quite a bit. Okay, so that has been in 2 of the proposals that I've seen, and I think moving forward, that's really what they're hoping to move towards, okay? So this is for the what if report. Domain 3, closing performance gaps. For this one, the last update I was at in November, there was not a decision on the final model for the what if report. Option 1 is looking at the gap to 60% at final level 2 or the college ready standard, and model 2 is a straight regression model. And I'll talk about each of those more specifically in a minute. But I really want to stress that at this point, TEA is tasked with delivering this what if report by January 1st. The meeting with the policy committee was in early November. I want to say it was around the 14th of November. And so at some point, we were still debating what would be the best model for the A through F system. But TEA has a deadline. So they are making a decision. And I don't know today which of the 2 models will be in our what if report. But these were the last 2 that were shown to us. Okay? So let's talk about option 1. In this option, we would identify one group based either on race, ethnicity, or economic status that is based on prior year performance, looking at their performance at final level 2. That one group would be the group that has the lowest performance in the prior year. That performance, again, is focused on performance at level 2 final standard, and it's collapsing all grades, all subjects, okay? In order for that group to be considered, they have to have at least 40 test results when they collapse everything together, all right? So instead of having 3 groups like we do in Index 3, this is identifying one group. It eliminates double counting students, so there's some advantage to that. Once that's done, they will calculate the gap. So in this model, there is a true gap that is our goal. The gap is defined as taking the performance at final level 2 of the identified group and subtracting 60. And that is your gap. So for example, if we, in our campus, the lowest performing student group in the prior year was Hispanic, and let's say they had 45% passing at final level 2 across all subjects. Then to calculate the gap, we would take 45 minus 60, which would give us a negative 15. So in this model, we could have negative scores because we're looking at a true gap. Does that make sense? So if the student group identified had 0% attaining level 2 final standard, what would the gap be? It would be 0 minus 60, so it would be negative 60. Let's say our lowest group is at 65%. So what would the gap be? 65 minus 60, a positive 5. Okay? So it's going to run the range from as far as having 0%, which would be at a negative 60, to having 100% at final level 2, which would be a positive 40, or 40 points above 60, which is our focus goal. Does that make sense? So then they're going to take all of these gap scores and they're going to sort them from high to low, or from low to high. An A is going to be, a line is going to be drawn at the 10% mark for A's, 20% mark for B's, 35% for C's, and again 20 and 15 for D and F. So it's that same curve that they're putting in place. There is one exception to this model that follows after your base score is set. So we calculate our gap, and then we can tell based on the standard where we're going to fall. Okay? But then they're going to add an additional feature that says if your initial score falls as a D or an F, then they're going to look at a regression based on the performance by your identified group at the final level 2 against the percent of that identified group. So we were looking at Hispanics. So they would regress the percent of the final level 2 score for Hispanics against the percentage of Hispanic students in your campus type. And I'll give you a model of a regression, what regression looks like here, so hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer. But if you are above the regression line here, then your grade is going to be bumped up a letter grade to either, if you're at a D, to a C, if you're at an F, to a D. So let's look at the regression model. Here they would be looking at performance in domain 1 results. Okay? So in the first model, they're looking at final level 2 performance only. What was domain 1 looking at? They were looking at satisfactory, the recommended, and advanced. They were looking at all 3 levels to get one number. So in this regression model, they would take that one number and they would look at it specifically for your economically disadvantaged students, and they would regress it by the percent economically disadvantaged for each campus type. So elementaries with elementaries, middle schools with middle schools, high schools with high schools. So what is a regression? So really they're going to take, here's where we would line up all of our scores. And we're going to look at that compared to the percent economically disadvantaged. So if I'm at a campus that is, let's say, 75% economically disadvantaged, okay, so here I am, and my score is expected to be, based on this line, on average, let's say that corresponds to a 35. Okay, so on average for my campus type, 75% economically disadvantaged, they're scoring at a 35. My grade is going to be based on where I fall in reality compared to this line. If I'm above the line versus below the line, okay? So what they did is they looked at the standard deviation of scores and they set some bars, 2 above and 2 below, okay? The above lines, these are going to then be used to determine your letter grades. So if I want to get an A and I'm in this world, and then I have to score above that top line, which is going to be set at 1.5 standard deviations above the mean. So so this is where everybody is typically scoring. If I want an A, I have to score 1.5 standard deviations above that. And we can know what that number is once it's all defined, all right? But that would then give me an A. A B is going to be this zone that is half a standard deviation above that mean line. The C's are going to be between plus or minus a standard deviation, so it's in this zone. either above or below, so you can be a little bit below average and still be a C, right, because there's a band there. If you're below a half standard deviation, you're going to get a D, and if you're below 1.5 standard deviations, that is an F. Does this make it a little bit clearer in what they're looking at? So when we talk about in that model 1, a regression of looking at, so instead of having star domain 1 scores here, this side would be your performance at final level 2. And instead of having percent free and reduced, it would be the percent of your student group. So we were talking about Hispanics, so it would look at your percent Hispanics. So if we were 50% Hispanic, we would be here. And then this, let's say that is a 60, that would be the average performance for that student group. So for you to be bumped up, you would have to be above the line. Does that make sense? Okay, so these are the two models in play. Both have pros and cons. One of the pros of model 1 or option 1 is the fact that there is a true gap that is measurable. That is something you can talk about, that's something you can work towards specifically, right? With option 2, you're starting with a mean. So your rating is dependent on how everybody performs in the end. Okay, but this one takes into account the proportion of free and reduced kids that you serve, your proportion of economically disadvantaged. So it's controlling for that to not sort of displace those campuses that have high ED. It's going to take that into account. All right? Both of them are difficult to explain to the public, but I think that this one is a little more difficult. But I also think this is the one that Commissioner Morath prefers. Okay? So these are the two options we see right now. Questions about domain 3? So the question was really looking at a combination, focusing on that last bullet. So recognizing that what this last bullet does is it centers this regression solely on what you are identified for in that option. So in this case, our Hispanic example. And what it would do is give an option for our campuses that are in the D or F category to bump up 1 letter grade, affecting the shape of that curve. So these bump up options will not then be reversed and say, oh, we have 7 that are bumping up, so let's renormalize the curve. No, that is a straight help for campuses that start at a D or an F. The question is, when will we know which option is selected for our A through F world? We will know what was chosen for the what if report when it is released. And that is not necessarily the option that will be in place in 17-18. There are a lot of unknowns that were very prescriptive in HB 2804 that TEA, number 1, can't even model right now. And number 2, without looking at how it plays out in some option, then we can't decide which is the best or what needs to be tweaked. So I would agree that this first what if report is truly a what if. What if we move forward with these parameters right now? How would our schools look? And I think when it becomes reality, it will be tweaked again to make it something more reflective of what we think is true. We meaning TEA, not Elvia. For Accountability 2017, we still have the 4-index system. This is our last year of a 4-index system. So ratings that come out in August of 2017 will be met standard or improvement required. So the question is, if we're making allowances here for certain student groups, does that take us back to the world before all of these safeguards and accountability pieces were put in place to specifically address different student groups? My answer to that is no. And that is because the passing standard for every student, regardless of race, ethnicity, any of those economic status, the standard is the same if they're taking the same test. So the expectation is the same. What this does is it says, you can't control who comes into your campus in this model, so we are going to adjust your accountability expectation based on what is average. Okay? So this one is saying in order for you to get the A you want, you have to be performing with the student group that you have above average. This one is doing the same thing, but its focus is on where are you in the prior year performing at your worst, okay? And in our example, we said it was with Hispanic students. So if your Hispanic students are your lowest performing, then in the next year, that's the one we're going to look at. So they're taking that forward and focusing it on so that no lowest performing student group is being lost. Okay? Good. Good questions, guys. Okay. Domain 4 is post-secondary ready, and this is the one where HB 2804 was the most prescriptive, I would say, for our high schools and a bit for junior highs. But I want to remind you, in Domain 4, there is no STAR data allowance. This cannot include state assessment results. So for elementary, the indicators are attendance rate for all students, and they are looking at including attendance by student group. Well, you may have 95% attendance, but that may look very different when you look at it based on economic status, African American, Hispanic, white, ELL, special ed. So there is a contingency plan to look at it by student group, and there's also the consideration of not looking at straight attendance rate, but looking at your chronic absentee rate. What is chronic absenteeism? It is a student who is absent for 10% or more of the time that they're enrolled on your campus. So you're 5% absent, so if your attendance rate is 95%, that 5% may be the same 10 kids. That is a very different issue than having it spread out across the 300 kids on your campus. Okay? So there's a possibility, even with the what if report, looking at chronic absenteeism instead of a straight attendance rate. But attendance rate was mandated in HB 2804 to be included in Domain 4 for elementaries. They also said other indicators as appropriate. There was a lot of debate about what other indicators could be included for elementary. It was from things to discipline rate, retention rate, exit rate for ELL students. It also considered even through looking at fitnessgram results. In the end, there was no consensus of which of these would be best for measuring post-secondary readiness for elementary kids. So for now, if your highest grade level is below 7, then your entire 35% for Domain 4 is based on attendance rate only. So for you guys, attendance rate only. And FYI, your attendance now is what's going to impact the first real report. Okay, so it's important to be tracking that attendance. For junior highs, they have attendance rate, same points I made for elementary apply to junior high. Could be chronic absenteeism, could include by student group, but they also will have their annual dropout rate, their 7th, 8th grade dropout rate will also be considered. And if a campus has both indicators, attendance and dropout, then they're going to be in the what if report modeled equally. They're weighted equally. 50% of your final score will come from attendance and 50% from your dropout rate. Okay? Now I will say that HB 2804 also mandated that we include in the future the percentage of 7th and 8th graders who receive instruction for high school, college, and career preparation as mandated in HB 18. Well, this has been mandated and we don't have the data available for 2016, so it's not included in the model, but it's being captured now. And because it is mandated, Richardson ISD, this piece should be at 100%, right? It is mandated. Every one of our students should be doing this. So this should be a free 100% for all of our junior highs, okay? Because it is a state mandate. Okay, high schools. High schools is where it is a little bit different. They have more post-secondary ready indicators that are readily available. For graduation rates, which this mandated need to contribute 10%, we have the choice between the best in the 4-year graduation rate and the 5-year graduation rate. That is exactly what it is in the current index for high schools, okay? In addition to that, 20% will come from post-secondary ready indicators. And here is a list of what was mandated as post-secondary ready indicators in HB 2804. We have, for students who graduate in the given year, so for our what if report, it's looking at 14-15, 2 years in arrears. Okay? It's looking at those who completed a coherent sequence of CTE courses, those who completed one or more AP or IB courses, those who earned 12 hours or more towards a post-secondary ready degree, those who achieved the TSI benchmark on either the TSIA, the college placement test, or SAT or ACT. That one is not available this year. But we also are looking at those who enlisted in the armed forces, not available for the what if report. Those who earned an industry certification, not currently available. But all of those pieces were prescripted in the bill. So they're capturing that now with PEIMS submissions, so it will be there in the future. So that'll adjust what our real report looks like even for our high schools. But right now, what we do have available has already been included and accounted for in our current index system. In addition to that, we have the annual diploma plan rate, and that'll contribute 5%. That's looking at kids who graduate with either a recommended or distinguished achievement plan diploma, or if they're on the foundation high school plan, if they graduate with an endorsement or a distinguished level of achievement. That too is in our current system. But in the domain world, it'll contribute 5% of the overall score for domain 4. Okay? So the combined results will lead to the final calculation for domain 4 for all of these pieces, much like we currently have, minus the star data piece for our high schools. Okay? Grades again are following that same curve. Okay, that's what's being recommended right now. All right, so those are all the ones that are familiar to us in terms of our current state accountability system. So let's talk about domain 5, which is the community and student engagement piece. These indicators will come from one of the 9 indicators that are listed in our community and student engagement accountability system. As a district, we will have to pick 3 specific areas and identify them in the fall prior to the accountability rating. At the beginning of the year, we're going to have to say, these are the 3 that I'm going to be rated on. We have to submit the criteria for those 3 ahead of time, right? And then we assign the grades ourselves based on what we identified and the scale that we set, okay? So what does that mean for Richardson RISD? It means we and every other district in the state should be selecting the 3 areas that we believe are best for us. And so this should be a place where we get an A, right? We need to identify where we're good, set scores that are meaningful, and that's one of the things I like about the community and student engagement system in Richardson, in that we do some validation in the standards that we set. But for this new system, we're going to have to redefine the cut scores for our own criteria so that we assign A's through F's. Right now, the labels for community and student engagement are unacceptable, acceptable, recognized, and exemplary. So these will have to be redefined so that we know what an A is and we know what an F is. This is not going to be part of the what if report that we're going to see in January. They do not believe they have sufficient data to produce this. Number 1, because we weren't required to identify which 3 we want to use. And number 2, all of the ratings associated with it are unacceptable, acceptable, recognized, and exemplary, not an A through F. Okay? So it's not included. You will still have to self-evaluate on the whole system. Okay, so here's the overall picture of where we stand. You see the relationship of each of these pieces. You have a letter grade in all 5 of the domains and then 1 overall. So how are they going to calculate that 1 overall grade? We know what the proportion is, but there is going to be a domain 1 score that looks very different from the domain 2 score, that looks very different from the domain 3 score. But they all have to combine to feed into that 55%, okay? Let me just say that right now the proposal is to weight those equally, whatever they are, to treat them all the same. But there is some alternative options where they're considering saying, let's treat domain 1 and 2 as interchangeable, like we have in our current system. So then you would take the best score from your domain 1 or domain 2 and average it with your domain 3. Those are the two sort of models that they're looking at. But again, all three are very different scores, right? In addition to that, we have to take what's happening to high schools or to your elementaries, junior highs, and contribute 35% of whatever that score is to this final grade, and then 10% from how we self-grade. So how are they going to go about combining all of these? Well, the current option that they're looking at is converting all of these to a scale score like a GPA. So A's would be converted to a point between 4 and 5. B's would get points between 3 and 3.99. So here's the pattern, right? So they're looking at assigning points to the letters so that it can be converted into a GPA to get that overall final letter grade. How they're going to do that still isn't finalized. But this overall score was not part of the requirement for this first what if report. Why? Well, number one, we don't have data to even do this piece, okay? So even in this what if world, we won't know what our overall grades will look like with the first release, okay? So going back to that timeline. So here we are. What if report is coming out January 1st. Officially, it'll be like January 4th, and it'll be public January 6th. Public January 6th. So what's happening after that? We come back in the spring semester, we get this what if report, we still have spring testing happening. We're going to have to, we get to the summer and we're going to have to assign our 3 areas, which means between January and this summer, we have to reset those cuts for A through F. We'll get our final 2017 ratings, and then we'll move into the 17-18 school year. At the end of that school year, we'll have to submit our grades like May, June. We're going to have to say Richardson ISD got an A, Apollo Junior High got an A, Aiken Elementary got an A. We're going to have to send those May, June. And then in August of 2018 will be the first official release of A through F. Okay? I do want to state something that was mentioned at the meeting yesterday, and that is that the majority of the superintendents in Region 10 and in some of the surrounding districts do not believe that the A through F system is the best representation of what's true of for our students or for our schools. So what I didn't put on here is that another big thing is happening in Texas in January. Does anybody know what that is? The legislature is meeting again this January. So January 1st, they will have a copy of this report for all of our schools and our districts, and then they'll have their 2017 session.